LiSTNR production.
A warning. This episode contains descriptions of violence against women and children. Please listen with care. Welcome to Crime Insiders Forensics. For those joining us for the first time, my name's Kathryn Fox. I'm a former GP, crime author and screenwriter. I'm enthralled by forensics and have spent thousands of hours researching for books and screenplays. So I thought, why not turn my research into a podcast? Every week, you'll be joining me in discovering how forensic science is helping solve high-profile crimes in Australia and around the world. Photographic documentation is an important and routine step in criminal investigation. But can a photograph prove innocence or guilt? And even when accurate, is it open to interpretation?
It's not about just what it looks like, but why does it look like what it looks like?
Professor Gale Spring has extensive expertise in forensic and scientific photography. From working with medical examiners in Texas to assisting forensic investigators on some of Australia's most controversial homicide cases, including the disappearances of baby Azaria Chamberlain and British tourist Peter Falconio, Professor Gale Spring is a pioneer in scientific photography. To begin, we hear how he became instrumental in the creation of the first official forensic photographer position of what we now know as the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine.
For 11 years, I was at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School, which was affiliated with the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Science in Dallas, Texas. And I'd been there for, like I say, 11 years when I saw an advertisement pop up about a position in scientific photography at RMIT University in Australia. And as I tell my friends, I was having a bad day, so I ended up sending a letter and getting a response and got the position of heading up a scientific photography program with emphasis in biomedical and forensic photography at RMIT University.
What sort of particular skills do you need when you're photographing changes to bodies in a dead person as opposed to a live surviving person?
Well, that's an interesting question because the techniques are probably about the same. Dealing with someone who is living, a patient, can sometimes cooperate with you a little bit better in moving one way or another or standing in a particular position. That's sometimes an advantage, but actually sometimes, and in cases where the patient truly doesn't want to be there or want images taken, that can actually be a problem. In the mortuary, generally, you don't have that problem of somebody objecting to it, but then you have the other problem of having to get morgue clerks and assistants to help, say, position a body in a particular way. But one of the most important things throughout all of scientific forensic medical photography is lighting and the control of that light to position things so that you actually show a fair and accurate representation of what you're shooting, as opposed to something that's exaggerated or possibly could even disappear. So from a technical point of view, lighting is pretty much the same.
If you're looking at pallor, for example, dead bodies aren't perfusing with blood. Contrast may be either increased or decreased depending on the types of wounds and injuries. How does that affect what you're seeing and how you're able to particularly focus on the specific thing you're wanting to photograph?
The forensic photographer or medical photographer needs to work very closely with the physician or the medical examiner in exactly what are we shooting, why are we shooting this, what are we trying to show. From that point on, then it's the skills and the knowledge of the photographer to now interpret that so that we get a photograph of that area. So things like, is the color important? Is the detail important? Is the location important? And in some cases, We can say, it would be a better picture if we wipe this blood away. And the medical examiner may say, no, we need to leave that blood exactly where it is, take a picture of what we see right now, and then later we will clean that up, and then we'll take another picture that shows possibly cut where it may show a serrated edge or something like that. So you work through it progressively with the person who he knows what he wants to see. It's the photographer's challenge to actually create that image as closely as they can to what's actually there.
How do you ensure that the jury and the lawyers, whomever, are seeing the same thing that you photographed in as close as the original colour as you saw it?
Well, the key phrase is as close as you could get to the original color, because none of these processes are designed to be 100% accurate in color reproduction. Every system has its own bias, and in fact, if you put up images on various computer screens and monitors, you will see that there's color variation between those. It is a problem to then represent accurate color in, say, court to a judge and jury and have them understand that. I do go to a court a lot, and most of the times I have to explain this from a basic, color theory and processes of why it may not be able to be accurately represented. But to go back to the simple answer to your question, is that there are color standards that are created for photographic purposes. And if color is important to you, you put something of a known color into the photograph, take a picture of that, and therefore that color bias that the system may introduce will be across the entire image. So we can now go back and make minor adjustments to that to make it as accurate as possible, therefore making the image look, again, as accurately as it can be through that technology.
Under what sort of circumstances would you be wanting to document the colour of a photograph to that specificity?
In my very early days coming to Australia, I was involved or asked to be involved in interpreting the color of grapes. There had been a shipment of grapes from Australia to the UK, and they left here in great shape. By the time they got to the UK, someone came along and said, these are not the same quality. And to show that, to demonstrate that, they took some photographs in the warehouse when the grapes had arrived. The question put to me was, how valid are these photographs that the UK side of the case were? And I said, well, they can't be examined at all because they're taken under very strange lighting conditions. There's no color check. There's nothing. So effectively, the courts ruled those pictures could not be used as evidence because there was no standardization of color in that. Had they used a color checker, even though it may have been wrong, we could have at least said we can attempt to adjust it. But another one, going back to the human situation, sometimes the color of skin can look a little bit different. Jaundice will be a little bit yellow, for example. And if we want to show that, we cannot simply take a camera, no matter how good it is, and just take a snapshot of that person in that area and say, it's going to reproduce that color yellow. It won't. There are all sorts of technical reasons why you may get something that looks actually quite normal to something that looks very yellow or green or whatever. By putting a color checker in the photograph, taking that picture, then removing that from the picture and taking a second picture under the same conditions of the skin, you can then make a judgment on whether somebody is, say, jaundiced or how much. Was it light yellow? Was it bright yellow? So these are actually quite important. We have techniques to assist in that, but they must be followed or the photograph for evidence is worthless.
While you were still in Texas, you were exposed to information about an Australian case that has been probably one of the most high-profile cases we've ever had, the Azaria Chamberlain disappearance of the child. How did you come to know about that case?
About 2 years before I knew about RMIT University and Australia, we had a visiting professor, Professor Plukon, who had worked on the Azaria Chamberlain case. And he came to make a presentation to our pathologists and our forensic pathologists on that case. I was there and I listened to it all, found it very fascinating. And later on, I think Dr. Stephen Cordner had also made a visit to our facility. So I was aware of the Chamberlain case even before I came to Australia. And when I came to Australia in 1988, one of the first people that I looked up just to make a professional contact with was Dr. Stephen Cordner. And in a conversation that we struck up, and he knew about our facility at the University of Texas, and he said that he would like to establish something similar to our department here in Melbourne. So I was involved with him in setting all of that up originally.
Did you have any further involvement in the Azaria Chamberlain evidence?
Yes, I did. Just prior to the Institute wanting to put all of the evidence in cold storage, waiting for other scientific processes or things that they might be able to use, Professor Cordner asked me to come and photograph the evidence that they had for the final time before it was being wrapped up and put in literally into cold storage. So I was able to view and handle much of the evidence that had been presented in the court. There were a couple of things that were curious, I thought. I was given carte blanche in huge room, an evidence room with all of the material there to take out each piece of material and photograph it for this historical record. And I do remember two things that were interesting. I opened up a bag and pulled out a piece of metal. And I didn't know what it was, didn't know what significance this piece of metal, which looked like it had been cut out of something. And so I actually called in Professor Cordner and said to him, I said, well, why? Why am I photographing this piece of metal, which looks like a piece of metal cut out of a car with undercoat spray on it? What significance does this have? And he says, why do you say that? I said, well, because as a young boy in America who was into cars, I've seen a lot of these kind of cars in the undercoat. This is what it is. And then he went on to explain that in the trial that someone had said that there was, I think, fetal blood or something on this piece of metal. And I looked carefully at it and I said, well, I don't see any blood, but I see a lot of red undercoat spray, which looks a little funny, and I could see why you could mistake that. So I photographed it. We put it away. But the second piece was the jacket that I think the young boy was wearing. I photographed the jacket as you normally would, and then there was a very slight little tear, which I sort of interpreted as a stab wound, not a wound, but a stabbing of something sharp. And so again, I called in Professor Cordner and I said, okay, I've done the jacket. Would you like me to photograph this little area that's been incised? And he said, why do you say that? And I said, well, it looks to me like a lot of the little stab cut marks in this piece of nylon. And he said, oh, well, that's very interesting. And then went on to tell me about possibility or some of the theories of why it was or wasn't that. But yes, I suppose my experience of doing a lot of that kind of material in America made me see it quicker than, say, somebody who might not have that experience.
There was a case in South Australia that I'm really keen to talk to you about. It involved the death of a young woman in a bath, and her partner at the time, Henry Keogh, was a person of interest in her death. Can you talk us through that?
Yes. In the beginning, and officially, I was brought some photographs to look at and make comment on. They were what you might call medical photography, forensic photography. They were a mixture of a couple of color photographs and a couple of black and white photographs. And I found it curious that they were black and white, but I was asked to look at those, and one picture in particular was supposed to have represented a bruise or a mark that was similar and had been purported to be like a thumb mark, a thumb print on, I believe, the ankle of the deceased. And it had gone to court and been presented as that was a bruise caused by grasping of the ankle. And I believe that had something to do with her being drowned in a bathtub. So I was asked to comment on that. And the first thing I said was, well, why is it black and white? And it doesn't prove anything. We don't know about the color of this at all. And I made a comment and said, well, it looks to me like the histology would have indicated whether it was a real bruise or not a bruise. And then I was told, well, there was no histology done on that, which I found very curious. So looking at the validity of that picture to represent a bruise on an ankle, it was at the lowest level. It didn't show anything. It could have been a mark of any sort. It could have been a birthmark. It could have been an ink stain. It could have been a fingerprint. It could have been those things. But the fact is that there wasn't anything leading towards a definitive answer. And I believe that that was one of the important parts of the case.
To my knowledge of the case, the theory proposed by the forensic pathologist Colin Manouk was that the suspect had held her by the leg and drowned her by lifting her leg up, which was supposed to have pushed her head under the water. She had no other bruising, no other marks on her. If you think it's a bruise, first thing is, how old is the bruise? A black and white photo would not have helped in terms of aging a bruise. But as you said, the histopathology and histology would have given it away if they had actually looked at the sort of cells that were under the skin. You could help date it that way as well. If that was never done and all this emphasis was placed on these marks on one leg, not both as well, and just basic physics, a woman's leg is usually stronger than a man's hand. So when I remember reading about that case, the first thing I thought was that just doesn't make any sense. But the fact that they took black and white photos, do you have any idea why they would have taken black and white photos when they had colour options?
Well, it is an interesting question, and one that I not only wanted to follow up myself, but others were interested in it as well. There was a time many years ago when color photographs were not allowed into evidence at all. They were supposed to be too inflammatory. We're over that, and we've been over that for quite some time now. We can show color photographs in juries. And so I wondered when that transition had come about. And I discovered that we were certainly using color photographs at the time that black and white was made. I never got an answer from Manouk or anyone on that side as to why did they use black and white film. That's even more trouble than using color back then. So I never got an answer for that. But for all the reasons that you've stated, if we're dealing with something that we want to see some coloration of, there's no reason not to have used color. And the fact is that there were some color photographs, other photographs taken around that same time by Manouk or somebody. So color film was being used, but why would you actually use black and white then? I don't know, and it certainly isn't. It isn't a part of the proper procedures to photograph wounds anymore. Should have been in color.
Did you have to testify at all in that case or any appeals?
I did have to testify at the South Australian Medical Board hearing over the procedures that Dr. Manouk was using. And of course, I could only comment on the photography, and the things that we have just discussed were brought out in that. To me, it was either a total disregard to the evidentiary nature of the color photograph that could have maybe helped something, and probably more just the disregard, pick up a roll of film, a camera, or whatever, take pictures. I don't think it was subversive in any respect because it wasn't all that impactful. But why? Why would you do this? And I was there to testify of the procedures that should have been done and were done across Australia at the time, and certainly in my experience in the U.S. And when I say these were snapshots, they truly were kind of snapshots. They were not professionally done. The lighting was poor, composition was poor, the background was cluttered, lots of things that just weren't done properly.
So you have to wonder then if that was the standard by which those people were working, and how many other cases, therefore, might have been influenced by a lesser standard, perhaps, than would be acceptable otherwise.
Yes, the unfortunate part, too, that falls into interpretation of images for forensic purposes is that we all like a narrative. And if somebody presents a picture to you and gives you a narrative, unless you have some real reason not to believe it, you will believe that narrative. There's the picture, it supports my narrative, therefore picture is accurate. When you're dealing with forensic matters, you really have to go back and look at any biases, any competencies or incompetencies in this, and also look at, does the story really match the photograph itself? You've got to ask these questions. If you just take it at face value and believe somebody's narrative, even believing mine, don't believe mine, challenge me, ask questions. This is the way it should be. But unfortunately, in the court system, we generally have images presented. Somebody stands up and says, this is what it shows. Jury or whoever says, yep, that's what it shows, and they move on. There needs to be more scrutiny in these.
So a picture can paint 1,000 words in art, but not in forensic photography.
If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then they've never read a court document. It's going to be 100,000 words if it's explained correctly. And it's not about just what it looks like, but why does it look like what it looks like? That's really important. The why, how it was created, why does it look this way? Can't just take things on face value. Things like, for example, shots at night, photographs at night, which I've looked at a number of those, and somebody will say, well, it's very dark. This is why I have a dark photograph. Well, does that represent what somebody would have seen when they were there? The answer is no. No, it does not. The human eye has a much wider range of ability to see in darker areas than film or video or electronic capture in general. So if it's just a snapshot of something at night, it doesn't represent what people saw. So somebody needs to come in and say, well, these are the things that affect that.
As it turns out, though, Henry Keogh's conviction was overturned, and a further trial was suggested, but it wasn't followed through with. And he was actually granted a reasonable amount of money from the South Australian government as compensation after serving, I think, 20 years in prison.
Well, the people that I dealt with, and I knew them for many years, that dealt on the trial, the case, they were truly pretty well convinced that he was innocent. Sometimes when I deal with lawyers, you get the sense that some of them are adamant about, my guy is innocent. And a lot of times you get the idea that we are going through the process. We are doing our justice. And working with lawyers, I get that sense sometimes, not always, but sometimes I do. But in the Keogh case, I can tell you that I found no one that I was dealing with that didn't firmly think that he was innocent. So it didn't surprise me, when all of this finally churned its way through and he got out. I think he got a raw deal.
Have you been asked to assess CCTV and compare them to, for example, suspects?
It is an increasing area that I'm asked to do. And that's because there are more CCTVs around as well. So more things are captured. And in my opinion, it's one of the areas that's the most dangerous to make any kind of definitive statement on identity or identification of an object or whatnot. The one thing that most people don't understand is that CCTVs were never intended to be for investigation. Their primary reason to exist are for showing that some event happened, something happened at a certain time in a certain place. So somebody jumps over your fence at 2:00 in the morning, steals something. Well, when did they come? Well, let's go back to the CCTV. Something's missing. There was a person that jumped over. We see them throw something over the fence. Chances are that's when it happened. Who was it? Well, that may be a little bit harder to determine because the resolution and the tonalities of the reproduction of CCTV is not very good. And yet we continue to try to do that at our own peril, I'm afraid.
Were you involved in examining some CCTV of a suspect in the murder of Peter Falconio, who was a British tourist who disappeared in rural Australia, and Bradley John Murdoch has been convicted and imprisoned for that crime?
Yes, I was asked to look at several pieces of evidence over the period of time that they were investigating it. Probably the most critical piece was the CCTV in, I believe it was Barra Creek convenience store, service station, whatever, pictures of an individual coming in from the front door, which the prosecution said was Murdoch, and that put him in that vicinity at the time. So I was asked to look at that CCTV to see if there was anything that really would concretely say it's him or it's not him. And again, CCTV is in general very poor. This capture was very poor. There were a lot of details that you could not see. And so I was asked to comment on that. And I tried to explain the dangers of making a concrete identification of him, pointing out a few anomalies to the jury. Eventually, he was found guilty, so don't get involved in that. All I can do is just tell people why a picture looks the way it does.
He had a distinctive mustache. Sort of, I suppose, in Australia, Merv Hughes was a cricketer who had that kind of mustache. Was that something that the CCTV showed or didn't show?
Well, that was the crux of one of the questions. There was a dark area under the nose. The resolution, that is the detail that you could really see, was not very good. And so it looked like a dark area, but was it an actual mustache or was it a shadow? If it was a mustache, was it as big as what the dark area showed? None of those questions could actually be answered very well. But there were a lot of sort of questions that was leading to, well, anybody can see that this is Murdoch. It looks like him. And I remember one little bit of testimony where I was getting a little frustrated at trying to make my point. And I remember putting the question mostly to the jury as I turned around and looked at them. And I said, if you can see clearly that that is a mustache under his nose, tell me what the logo says on his cap. Now, if you go back and look at that photograph, you cannot read the logo, which is much bigger than his nose. You can't read it. The resolution of that CCTV is so poor that nobody would be able to tell what the logo is on the cap. And yet you're going to turn around and tell me, but I can see well enough that that's a mustache and that's Bradley Murdoch's mustache. I got a few interesting glances back from the jury on that point. But again, I don't know whether it got across or not, or whether anybody was really listening to me. But I can tell you, They still don't know what the logo was on the cab.
Do you think juries have a false faith in CCTV identifications?
A very interesting question in the way you put that, too. And I'm just going to simply answer, yes, I do. And one of the reasons that I do, in general, no, not specifically, but in general, I think so, because years ago, it came out a term, the CSI effect. And the CSI effect can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But in imaging, one thing that it does is that we know that somewhere in Hollywood, they have software that is so good that we can take absolutely rubbish pictures, but blow them up huge. We can see license plate numbers. We can see reflections in people's eyes. We can see all of these things so easy. Now, I'm not saying everybody is gullible, but we have been brought up with the fact that forensic science, number one, only takes 30 minutes to solve. And number two, we can take photographs and blow them up so big that we can see everything. Digressing only ever so slightly, I think, at RMIT a few years ago, we created an elective course called Science Fact, Science Fiction. And it was a one-semester course which looked at all of the things that one sees on television and in the media about science and time travel and space travel and all that, and including imaging. And we put it together as a very interesting, again, an elective subject. And it was a lot of fun doing the one for imaging, because taking excerpts from CSI and Bones and NCIS and all sorts of movies, the things that people see and possibly believe that the technology is kind of there. And so why can't you see that? Why can't you do that? It becomes a bit of a curious problem.
How far away is the technology?
Well, it gets better and better every day, and it gets worse and worse every day. Because now that we're moving into the AI, now it's going to be more and more difficult to determine what's real and what's not real unless you know the provenance of the image. Who shot it? Where did it come from? Were there any witnesses to it being shot? I have said for years, especially in looking at CCTV, that in general, you look and you analyze and you ask a few questions about how it was made and all that. That's sort of normal routine. But if I found that a piece of video came in and the person who shot it was an S. Spielberg, I might look a little more carefully at how that image was created than I would if I found out my next door neighbor shot it. It's okay. I understand their systems, but can you alter fake images? Well, yes, you can. Can you mislead through lighting? Can you mislead through perspective, lenses, and position? Yes, you can do that too. You can do it on purpose. You can do it accidentally. And this is why we have to ask all of these questions, even basic questions on basic photographs. Where'd this come from? Why do I have it? Who shot it? What did they shoot it on? Possibly even what time of day. Yeah, all of these things can add that little bit of information in helping interpret that image. As we move into AI, it's going to be an interesting time.
Is it easy to detect if an image has been altered, or is that becoming more and more difficult as well?
In my experience of dealing with images that have been actually, honestly altered, fortunately, criminals aren't too smart as far as technology goes. So yes, I have seen images that they've tried to retouch, that they've tried to change the metadata, the time and date something was happening. And those things are generally pretty easy to do. But saying that, somebody who is really, really good at the technology, really understands electronic imaging, computer processes and whatnot, can begin to make it much more difficult for the cursory glance. Years ago, a cursory glance and a few questions would get all the information that you need. Then we move into more sophisticated electronic things. It's more difficult and takes more experts in different areas of the technology to actually come together and try to come up with a cohesive single, this has been manipulated, it has been changed, it has been created. So it's getting more difficult in general and will become very difficult later on.
Are there any other cases that you think it's worth talking about that you're involved in or that highlight a different aspect of forensic digital photography?
One in particular that was just so, and I think we made our point very, very well. It was a pedestrian accident, and there had been a CCTV on a building that captured this. Now, this was at least a half a block away. So as you can imagine, the size of the cars, the size of the pedestrian are very, very, very small within this whole frame. It was technically a hit and run. So a car is traveling at night down this road. You see brake lights flash for a split second, and the car continues to go on. What happened was there was somebody coming between two cars across the street, and he was a bit impaired by something, and I don't know what. And so he comes between two cars. The driver of the vehicle says, only thing I know is the car, maybe I hit a bump or something. There was just a bit of a thud, and that's why I hit the brake. But everything seemed okay, drove on. The pedestrian who had come out to go across the road didn't die immediately, but made it across the road. And what we saw in the CCTV was a bright white jacket. Couldn't miss it. You could see him coming across the sidewalk between the cars and stepping out in front of the vehicle. You could see it on the CCTV. So how could the driver say, I didn't see him? But the investigators said, but when we found him across the road, he was dead. He was wearing a black jacket. So why did we see white and he's in black? So I had to come in and explain the infrared ability of the video cameras and why, to somebody seeing in the infrared, like the video camera, he would have stood out as brightly as we just saw, a white figure stepping out in front of the car. An individual not seeing in the infrared would have seen a guy in a black jacket coming from out of nowhere between vehicles. So he may not have seen him. And the streets had no lights, by the way. It worked out to where we were able to explain clearly that this guy didn't just hit him and run. Yes, he hit and left, but he didn't know that he had actually hit an individual. So that was a case I thought we made our point. Everybody seemed to agree. Prosecution and defense kind of smiled and said, oh, didn't know that. Didn't know it worked that way. I said, well, that is the way it works. Because had we not been there to explain it, then this guy would probably be up on true hardcore hit and run, that you must have seen him. Everybody else saw him. Why didn't you see him?
Why isn't skin color reversed then?
Well, skin actually reacts differently. It's not just a matter of black or white. I said it looked like he had a white jacket on. He was actually wearing a black jacket. And yet, one of the assignments I've given my students for years is to go photograph in the infrared anything that you've got that's dark color, from your jeans to your jackets to whatever. And what you will discover is that some black is black. It absorbs infrared. It does not reflect it. Some black that reflects infrared is white. And you've got all of the gray tones in between as well. So you cannot say, quite simply, even with him wearing a black jacket, I could not have said, well, it's a black jacket and it would have been white in infrared. Not necessarily true. It could have been a black jacket made out of a black material that actually didn't reflect infrared and therefore would have remained a black jacket. Invisible radiation, which is generally for us in forensics is infrared or ultraviolet, You actually have to go back and test the materials. You don't know what you're going to see until you actually see it.
Optical illusions. Why does one person see one thing and the other will swear blind it's the opposite?
Oh, if we only knew the answer to that question. It is such a critically important point in looking at photographs for evidence and what do they actually show or not show. Human beings, by their very nature, we love narrative and we like to make sense out of chaos. Visually, we like to make sense out of chaos. We look at something, we look at a mountain, we look at clouds, we look at rock formations, and we see faces, we see things, we see the elephant, we see, my grandmother in that mountain. We look up at the sky, we see animals, we see all sorts of things from stars. We are programmed to do that. And so even today, in our day and time, we still do that. We look at something, and if somebody suggests that, oh, don't you see a picture in that? Don't you see, that face? We go, oh, yes, I do. I do now, because I've been kind of led to do that. But even if you didn't lead me to do that, I might see it anyway. It's a question for our psychologists, I think, ultimately. I believe that the term for this is pareidolia, which is that human beings like to see patterns in things that don't necessarily really exist. So in photographs, this is why when we take a photograph and we blow it up and we enlarge it more and we enlarge it more and we enlarge it more, we see things that aren't there. And as soon as somebody makes a suggestion, don't you see that gun laying in the grass? Oh, yes, I do now. You didn't before, but you do now. It's a part of human nature. It's a part of interpretation of photographs. And again, as an aside, watch the 1960s cult film called Blow Up. It's a film by Antonioni, set in the UK, and it is all about that very thing. And at the end of it, you're not sure whether there was a murder. You're not sure whether there was a body, but it's beautifully done and indicates how people begin to see things in photographs that aren't there, or are they?
On that note, thank you so much, Gale, for joining us. And there's so much more to digital forensic photography than I think most people are aware. And it's absolutely fascinating going through how much is involved and in what sort of cases you are actually asked to testify. So thank you again for joining us. This has been really, really fascinating.
Thank you again for the invitation.
Crime Insiders Forensics is a LiSTNR original production. It's hosted by me, Kathryn Fox, and is produced by Ed Gooden. Sound design and imaging is by Link Kelly.